I'm not
What's
going
that?
to because you told me not to.
What? Wait, say it again.
I was gonna crochet, but sorry, we're
You
live.
can crochet if you want. We just went live right now, so you can totally crochet or whatever you want to do, whatever makes you comfortable. And I'm gonna actually start on. I'm gonna start with the selector on my face because I don't know if you noticed, but on the last week's video, the entire time I was reading the readings, it was you and Jacob on the screen, and I didn't realize that until it wasn't
We
your
didn't
fault.
know.
I clicked on you at some point 'cause we were talking before I went live, and then I just didn't click off of you guys. So it was you guys. It was like you guys just listening to me read the readings for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then I started clicking and going off. So anyway, I'm not going to do that this time, unless you want me to. That's fine too. Um,
No,
okay, so
no.
let's just jump into it. Uh, the reading. Have you guys read it?
Yes.
You guys have, yeah. Okay, have you, Mom?
I can't hear you.
Have you read the readings?
Yes, I have.
I'm gonna do something real quick. I'm gonna turn off the air conditioner because it's a little loud. I'm gonna do something that is completely against my nature and turn off the air conditioner. All right, cool.
Well, what?
The readings are they're not too long. The gospel's kind of long, so we might not actually read that. But let me look at the readings, first and second one definitely. It starts with Isaiah 22. The first reading. Thus says the Lord to Shebna, master of the palace, I will thrust you from your office and pull you down from your station. On that day I will summon my servant Eliakim, son of Hilkiah. I will clothe him with your robe and gird him with your sash, and give over to him your authority. He shall be a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. I will place the key of the house of David on Eliakim's shoulders. When he opens, no one shall shut, and when he shuts, no one shall open. I will fix him like a peg in a sure spot, to be a place of honor for his family. So I think you guys you guys I'm pretty sure know how this relates to the gospel, right? Because it's the whole like handing over the keys of the kingdom and the conferring the authority onto first Eliakim, but then onto Peter in the gospel in the New Testament. But for anybody who doesn't know that, that's what happens. And we can probably talk about that later on. The second reading is from Romans, and it's just a continuation. Really, really short. Paul saying to the Romans, "Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How inscrutable are his judgments and how unsearchable his ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has given the Lord anything, that he may be repaid? For from him and through him and for him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen." And this reading is like really kind of like, this was just strange for me because I had no idea how it like connected to the other readings for the week and how it had anything to do with the other readings. And I have a slightly better idea in my head. I have no idea if this is very like accurate or if I'm reaching, which I'm very apt to do sometimes. But what I was thinking was, this is really kind of like the capstone of what was going on last week, where Paul's saying, he's talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, and how the Gentiles, like in this weird kind of way in the language that he uses, the Gentiles received salvation and entrance into the family of God by the Jews' rejection of Jesus, basically, and he's not. I mean, he's kind of using a lot of language to do this, but he's also saying to the Gentiles, you can't boast because if God kicked the Jews out for doing what they're doing, what do you think he's going to do to you guys if you don't do what you're supposed to be doing? And so this whole thing. So he's capping it off by saying, what I'm taking it as, basically, everything I'm saying is kind of like hard to understand, like how he could grant your salvation through the rejection of the Jews and everything, and all this stuff that I'm saying might be a little weird, but God is so crazy and so great and so awesome that we can't really, like, if his ways seem weird to us, we can't really, we can't find fault in them because his ways are not our ways, and he's so far above us and all this kind of stuff. The way so seeing it as like an ending to that, it kind of connects for me with the whole idea of conferring of authority, and later in the gospel we'll talk about Jesus asking the apostles, "Who do you say that I am?" What? My wife is laughing at me for some reason, probably because I'm talking a lot. Oh yeah. But in order to fulfill the mission, right? The mission. So Paul's talking kind of like about the mission of Christians is basically salvation, is oneness with God, right? May they all be one. And in order to fulfill that among Jews and Gentiles and all the peoples of the world, we need to have, I mean, we cannot do it on our own. We need to have the authority of God. We need to be one with God ourselves in order to hope to kind of spread that to anybody else and to be missionaries anywhere else and to minister anywhere else and to do what Paul's doing. So that was my kind of like reaching attempt at unifying the second reading with the first and the third. Just kind of by understanding that only through the authority that Jesus confers to the apostles and down to us can we do that. And of course, the gospel is Jesus asking. And we're not going to read it because we've heard it like a million times, and I think a lot of times when we hear the same words, they kind of become numb to us. At least they do to me. But Jesus asking the apostles, "Who do you say I am?" And the apostles saying, "Well, some people say you're this person, some people say you're Elijah, some people say you're Baptist." And he, of course, asks Paul, and Paul says, "You're the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus is saying, "You're right." And then he confers. Right then he confers the authority. I'm sorry, Peter. Right then he confers his authority to Peter, and whatever you bind shall be loosed in heaven, or shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose shall be loosed in heaven. So that happens. And the two questions I have for today, if we want to look at these questions, are like it's so cliche, like who do you think I am, like that, like you hear it all the time, or I hear it all the time in Christian circles and Catholic circles, like who do we say Jesus is? But my question is, if we had never heard that question before, if that part was not in the Bible, and we did not hear Peter's answer to that question, who would we actually say Jesus is? And by answering that question or by looking at that question, even though we have heard that question asked before, who do we now say Jesus is? Like, who do we honestly say is? Do we honestly agree with Peter, or do we kind of question it, or do we kind of wonder, or do we have a different answer? So that's the first question. Who do we say Jesus is if we had never heard Peter answer that question from Jesus? So I guess we can kind of open it up, and what do you guys think, just offhand? That was a really kind of like very wordy intro. Sorry about that, but go ahead.
I just want to say something real quick because I have to leave in 1 minute.
Okay.
I think it's really easy to say, Jesus is my Lord and Master, Jesus is my God, but then I look at my life and I think, oops, maybe not. Consider that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave you on that note.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you later. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
I don't know. I mean, we can. I guess maybe to kind of narrow it down, because I just mentioned a lot of things. First of all, do we have any thoughts about the readings themselves? The first reading was like a precursor, right? A biblical Old Testament type of conferring authority and giving keys to the kingdom to someone. And basically, what was happening was that this kingdom was not behaving well and kind of ticking God off. And when they, God says, before the reading, God says, when they should have been, or Isaiah is saying, the prophet is saying, when they should have been mourning and being kind of sorrowful, they were partying and having a good time and saying, drink today, for tomorrow we're going to die. And so God was like, well, because of all this craziness, I'm going to like take your leader and I'm going to take him out and put this other guy here and convey on him the keys of the kingdom. And just like a switching of, it was like a switching of leaders, I guess, a switching of like the seat of power. And the same thing kind of happened, the same thing totally happening in the New Testament, in the Gospel. Jesus had just been asked by the Pharisees, show us a sign that you're who you say you are, something that we can believe in. And Jesus obviously doesn't fall for it, and he's like, look guys, you know how to read signs, and you can't read what's right in front of your face. And right after that, we get to our reading of the Gospel, and he's asking the apostles, who do you say I am? And what I'm really getting strongly as I read it more and more is, look, the Jews, not the Jews, but the Jewish leaders had their time. The Jewish leaders have had all these things that I've given to them for a long time to grow and develop and get close to me. But their strength is in the law. Their strength is in their law, and they're so tied to it they can't see me. They can't see God when God comes down to them and acts like God. They can't see it, and they can't see how it fits with their law. And so I'm changing the reign of power. I'm changing what thing, what's gonna be in control here. So the first thing you need to do is see me as God. If you do, like, do you see me as God? And then if you do, only if you see me as God, as the Son of God, will you be open to this authority I'm giving to you? Because I'm going around the Jewish leaders. I would have loved to do it through them, but they're not cooperating. So we're going to take out the middlemen, and you guys are going to have the authority now. And what you do, that's what you say and what you do, what you loose and what you bind is what's gonna happen. That's kind of how I see it. I don't know if anybody kind of sees like that or has a different take on it.
I think that I don't think that the second reading is as out of place or as difficult to understand. To me, it sounds like in both the first reading and the gospel, God is saying that they will pass on the keys to the kingdom and the authority and the apostolate tradition, the beginning of the apostolate tradition, on to somebody unexpected, somebody who, who is Simon? He's just a regular guy. He's not a rabbi. He's not a philosopher. He's not anything. And Jesus is saying, "Blessed are you. You have this power." And the same is true in the first reading. This leader is not doing the job. I will choose somebody who I know will do the job, and I will give him the power, and he will have a place of honor. And I think that the second reading is kind of like justifying that in a way, like the way they work together. Like, as people, we don't understand who God chooses to do the leadership. Like I wouldn't have, maybe, if I were there in Jesus' time, I wouldn't have expected him to choose Simon Peter, especially considering all of the flaws that we see that he has throughout the gospel. Like, he's kind of outspoken, and he, doesn't think before he talks, and he, really human and cool, right? I like Simon, he's cool, but I wouldn't necessarily think of him as the most holy person to become the rock upon which Jesus would build his church. However, Jesus chooses him. And I feel like the second reading is kind of saying, his ways are so mysterious. God chooses whatever he wants. Who are we to say, to even have the knowledge to say thank you for what he's given us, or to even understand what he's given us? And who are we to question, or to try to give God advice and tell him, we're not. We just have to accept what he's given us and then say, "Okay, God, I'll figure it out." I don't know.
Yeah.
I also kind of, I don't know, I'm of the opinion that the Holy Spirit really moves to the church in the reading, in the ways that the readings are laid out. I think there's always some connection between them that's just there. And I think Sophia's spot on. I really do. I think in the first, you really have an example of God taking the authority that was there and just flat out replacing it in a way that probably a lot of people at the time didn't understand. Probably a lot of people at the time didn't feel as justified because they were celebrating. They were happy with where things were, but instead he said, "No, I'll take you down, and I will put my chosen one in the place." I think the imagery is really astonishing, looking at the Old Testament, especially where he says, "I will fix him like a peg in a sure spot," and I just find myself thinking of the nails on the cross, and I think that the second reading is exactly what Sophia is saying. It really speaks to how God is completely. We have no ground to stand on in terms of questioning the people he chooses to put in place. And I think that also, even though the first reading kind of mirrors the choice of Peter as a successor, um, yeah, I think even more so it mirrors Jesus as a successor to the Pharisees and the leadership of the church, as kind of a second example of this, of an example being placed fixed at a point in time for the earthly family to see as an eternal example of the leadership that he gives humanity. I think the readings are beautiful. They really, really do. And I always find it fascinating how Christ keeps it such a secret, and I love that it's always Christ letting people come to their own conclusion, and it really speaks to the fact that you really can't tell people about Jesus. You just have to learn to know Jesus yourself and provide that lens for them to look through. And I love the readings for this summer. I really do.
Yeah, right. You can't you can't tell, you can't, I mean, with anything really, right? You can't really convey good knowledge just by telling someone. You kind of have to like demonstrate it and show them and let them see it through a living, breathing kind of person, right? I was in class today, and one of my students, I was teaching third grade, and one of my students was like, so I'm teaching them songs, right, for church. And one of the students was like, this is what he said, and I'm not making fun of him. I was like blown away that he totally just said it and had no problem saying it. And I was kind of happy he did because it opened up like a really good conversation. He was like, I hate the Holy Spirit. That's what he said. And he's a cool little kid. He's a nice little kid, but he said, I hate the Holy Spirit, and I don't really like God very much either. And I was like, all right. And the kids were like, oh no, look, he didn't just say that. Like they were really kind of like, oh. And I was like, well, all right. I was like, maybe he doesn't know God very well. I was like, if I didn't know God very well, I don't know if I would like God very much either. I don't know. And so we were talking about it a little bit, and we got like this really cool conversation. The whole point being, he goes to a Catholic school. He's gone to a Catholic school for at least a number of years. He's 8 years old or 9 years old. Like he's not crazy young. He's old enough to be told like plenty of things. But he was talking to us, and he was saying, yeah, when I go to sleep at night, a lot of times I wake up and I have this image in my head of being at school and people being mean to me. And I was like, well, of course he doesn't like God, because like the people, if that's the way his life is, if people are generally kind of mean to him at a Catholic school, like I wouldn't like God either, And so the point was, hey man, we gotta like, how do we show God? How do we show people who God is? Show people who Jesus is, and not just tell them what they should be doing, but kind of just let them see it through our lives. Anyway, so yeah, I think it's kind of beautiful too.
One thing that I think is really, I don't know, it's just coming up for me. Like I was brought up in a super conservative Catholic, like meekness was this really, really important value, right? Like the idea of accepting what God gives you, and we're talking about it here. It was just like something I was brought up with, and I dated this Jewish girl for a while, and we're talking about the Jews and the handing over or whatever. And it's just interesting to me because in the Jewish tradition, that is not, it's the opposite, right? Like what you're supposed to do with God is to question him. You're supposed to argue. You're supposed to like really through, I don't know, to take things on like fully and conflict, like come to truth, and it's very interesting. Like the guy outside of like the angel, or the guy that's arguing with the angel on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Like that's like huge value of Judaism, or at least of the Jewish tradition. And I'm just wondering, like, it's interesting to me because in Catholicism, all I hear is this, right? Like God's ways are mysterious. You should accept them. And the church, as God's representation on earth, like in humility, accept what they say. And like when I tell people about Catholicism, one of the things that always comes back is yeah, but what about the Middle Ages, and what about this atrocity and this atrocity that we all like totally we did, like totally guilty, right? And
Yeah.
the hierarchy of like the church and like the overhead, and it's this really bad taste in people's mouths. And a thing that I personally value just because of the way I was brought up is like, even so, like there's something to learn, even if like some of the rules are stupid and they're actually not so good. Like in following the rules and in working for a bigger whole, and not trying to make myself like the big thing. Like there's value there. I don't know. There's something there.
No, I totally agree. I'm sorry. Did you have something to say, Leanne?
You're muted.
Oh, yeah. I think your sound's not on, Leanne. Are you there?
If you click your phone, and then on the bottom left, there's a little microphone that if you uncheck it, it'll unmute you.
Also, Nathan, on the left-hand side, if you click on Control Room, you could possibly unmute her as well.
Good call.
Well, I was looking on that. I was looking at that, but I couldn't. I wasn't able to. It didn't actually say she was muted on my end. But
Maybe her phone microphone is actually muted.
Yeah, try muting her and then unmuting. We lost her.
No, I see. Okay, hold on. Hold on. Let me try it real quick.
Your sound was working earlier in the call.
I can't. Yeah, it was. It was totally working. I can't actually mute or unmute her. I can't. I'm not able to do that for some reason.
Oh, okay.
Hey, Leanne, can you? Hold on. Let me see. Can you hear us, or can? Well, that's a dumb question to ask if she can't hear us. She can't hear that we're asking if she can hear us. But man, I wish we could hear her because I'm sure she has something really cool to say. Yeah, no, yeah. Anyway, sorry, we can't hear you, Leanne.
Maybe you could just hang up and then come back into the call?
Yeah, okay, try that, yeah. Okay. Maybe she'll try that. I'll let her hopefully try that. And then yeah, there you go. Okay, so she's gonna try that. This idea I had real quick though, of what you're connected to what you're saying, Jeremy, about challenging and not just kind of going along with things, or not just kind of doing things because we're told to. I think it's interesting because, so the Pharisees are tied to this idea of the law and what it means and their interpretation of how to follow it, and anything outside of it, or anything outside of their view of it, like is bad, right? I could imagine that you could even kind of see it that way, like they weren't questioning anymore. They weren't trying to like deepen any kind of understanding. They were like just tied to what they knew, and they were just kind of blindly following it, and no room for growth. It's interesting because in the Old Testament reading that's for this week, after the point where the reading stops, it goes on. So apparently Eliakim, the guy that gets the keys to the kingdom, he messes up. He's kind of like this disappointment. So later on the reading, it says, "On that day, says the Lord of hosts, the peg fixed in a firm place shall give away." Like Eliakim, this guy, the peg, that peg fixed in a firm place, it shall give away, break off and fall, and the weight that hung on it shall be done away with, for the Lord has spoken, right? And so I think it's interesting because also to connect the second reading, Paul was telling the Romans about the Jews and Gentiles, and how the Jews, the Gentiles were grafted in, and the Jews are part of the original tree, right? The Gentiles, part of a different tree, are grafted in, but if the grafted tree, the Gentiles, mess up, how quickly will they get torn off if the Jews, who were part of the original tree, were kind of like torn off too? So like it's kind of like the same idea as in the Old Testament, like even the guy that God brought in, even the guy that God, in all his wisdom and glory and all this kind of stuff, chose to do this or to ask to do this, he messes up, and he's going to get like thrown off too. I think it's like a good kind of like warning for us too, like as Catholics. A lot of times we think us Catholics are like the new, we talk about us being like the new Israel, right? The new chosen people, the spiritual Jerusalem, all that kind of stuff. And yet, if the real Jerusalem messed up and got kind of like pushed aside for a bit, how quickly will we, if we mess up, or as we mess up, because we've messed up a lot, will we get pushed aside? And so I think like doing what you're saying is really good, like questioning and thinking, and what does this mean? And I mean, this is what this whole thing is about, right? Like not just going to church and hearing the readings and then going home, but like really wondering what they mean for us, so that we can actually do something relatively good with them, and not just be like, oh, the Bible says this, the Bible says that, and you should do it because God says so. But really kind of like wrestling with God and seeing what happens.
This idea, this really like super Old Testament idea of like disobedience being punished, or like messing up being knocked out or whatever, is problematic for me. I know that in the Old Testament that's like a serious theme, like God punishes those who do not obey. But in the New Testament, that's less. Like it's more of Jesus saying, there's room for you. You like the inclusiveness and forgiveness and acceptance, I suppose. And so to me, it's hard. I don't really think of God as somebody who would cast you out for messing up, and
Sure. Right.
who would say, because we have messed up a lot. I mean, as Jeremy was saying, with the Crusades and with the Spanish Inquisition and with the pedophiles. I mean, the church keeps messing up, and I guess it's just because we're human, But the core of the church, the strength of the church, stays firm, and we find out with these marvelous leaders like Pope Francis, and that it keeps moving forward, that we learn more from each mistake and we work towards being better. And I think that God, that's kind of all He asks of us, as long as we continue to strive for improvement and to strive for lessened sinfulness. I think He's willing to accept us as many times as we mess up, as many times as we make a mistake. I think He's not likely to ungraft us from the tree unless we ourselves choose that that's what we want.
And that's kind of that's actually what I was talking about, actually. Yeah, because you're right. The Old Testament language is very like, man did this and God did this back to him. It's very kind of like a petty language, like petty way of talking about it. No, I don't think that either. I agree with you. I think we graft ourselves out. I think that we do. A priest asked us once. He said, "How many sins does it take to get into hell?" And he said, "It only takes 2. It takes 2 sins. It doesn't take 1. It takes 2. 1 is doing something that you end up feeling bad about, right? Which God does not put you in hell for. And 2 is not being able to forgive yourself, and you yourself turning away from God and saying, no, I can't. I'm not gonna mess with you because whatever, because of guilt or whatever and all this kind of stuff." And so he's like, if anybody's in hell, right? And that's a whole different conversation for a whole different time, I'm sure. But he's saying, if there's anybody in hell anyway, it's only because they could not get over themselves, and they could not accept the love that God obviously has for them. So right, yeah. I don't think even things like the Crusades, which were killed thousands, millions of people, and the Inquisition, and the things that we continually do, and the fighting between Muslims and Christians, and all this kind of stuff. I don't think those are kind of things that like God's like, oh, I'm done with Christianity. I think it's things like pride, like the Pharisees, where we're so prideful over our place in history, or we're so prideful over what we think we know, that we just, kind of like that, kind of like the story of Satan as a fallen angel. Like, we put ourselves above God, and it's really ourselves just kind of being like, okay, we're doing this to ourselves completely.
Maybe a way to restate your original point about the difference between the Jews and us is, like they're Jews. Like, as a Jew, you're doubly a Jew, right? You're a Jew because of your beliefs, but you're also because you were born a Jew. it's not just religion, it's also nationality. So there are
Right.
atheist Jews that don't believe in God, but they're still practicing Jews, right? Like they still like identify that way. It's so much easier to leave Christianity, right? Because it's just a belief, and if you put that belief down, you're kind of done. I mean, we have the luxury of like our family is a Catholic family, so it's hard to escape it, but it's not that hard.
But at the same
So
time, I mean, I really liked what you said earlier because I've always been of the belief that questioning has the innate ability to strengthen our faith in God. And I think if we're afraid to question, it secretly means that we're afraid to go answer them, that there will be an answer. I don't believe that every answer will come as we demand it, especially here on Earth. But I sincerely believe that one of the strongest ways to strengthen our faith is by questioning the things that we believe. I wouldn't be in the church right now if it weren't for the fact that I was willing to question the things that I believe. And it was I remember telling Sophia that if people don't believe strongly enough in something, then they'll get angry when you question them. Because it's okay to admit that you don't have an answer. But it's not okay if you can't admit that an answer will be forthcoming. It's not okay if you're not willing to accept the question and to allow yourself to question, to question if the policies that we have been doing are the right ones that are following Christ. And I honestly think the tradition of questioning is something that keeps us centered in the Holy Spirit. It's an active choice of movement towards Christ. Not questioning is an active choice to sit in where we are. We're all in the state of sin. So we'll never be perfect. I think there's always room for us to question. I like that you brought that up, Dan.
So how do we take this conversation and then put it back into your original question, Nathan?
Let's see.
Also, what happened to Lee?
I don't know. I don't know what happened to Leanne. I don't know. I hope she's okay. I'm sure she's okay. She might. Actually, you know what? She was. I can imagine she might be busy with laundry right now. She was doing her laundry. She was actually at the laundromat when she joined the call, so she was waiting for her laundry to be done. So she might be doing stuff with that. I don't know. But I'm sure we'll get her on either at the end of this conversation or at another conversation in the week. And real quick, by the way, so it's funny that Jacob's here and Sophie's here because Jacob is the guy in Genesis who wrestled with God. He's one of the figures that kind of I think informed that whole idea of like wrestling with God's a good thing. And he was accosted at night. It was nighttime. He couldn't see, and this basically this intruder comes and like tackles him and he wrestles him and he spends hours wrestling this guy. He doesn't know who he is and he and it was God basically. It was a messenger of God and he ends by the end of it. It's been hours and he's totally tired and he's banged up and I think he ruined his leg. The whole thing kind of like left him a little bit handicapped. But he had earned God's respect. That's the whole kind of idea of the story. So yes, that's definitely like a huge thing. And I think that's something that we need to get a lot better at doing as Catholics, as Christians, as people in general, because it's really kind of annoying to be told just do it because that's because I say so or because God says so, and that doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah. It used to work for me. It used to just Jesus is God. Like back to your question, like me, it was up until maybe I was about 20 years old, just because a priest said it or because the Bible said so or because even my mom, who knows a lot about Catholicism and theology, said something, it was automatically true, and I just kind of took it on faith. And then I started living life, and real life started happening to me instead of protected teenager life. And I realized that maybe that wasn't right, and I had a lot of questions, and there are things that I kind of disagree with the church about, just basically fundamentally do not agree with. And there are things I disagree with my husband about theologically that they're kind of funny, and I'm not going to get into them because there's, whatever, we don't have 10 hours.
10 hours for the disagreements.
Wow.
But
A lot of stuff.
no, it's not a lot of stuff. It's just that it's a very fundamental disagreement.
No, I understand, right.
But as far as who I say that Jesus is, if you'd asked me maybe 2 years ago, I probably would have said a giant asshole. And it would have been unjustified, of course, but very human. But now I think I'm back to Jesus is God to me, and Jesus is...
That's been a good 2 years there. It's been a very impactful 2 years of your life.
I think it has. I think I've grown a lot. There's definitely a time when I was like I went to church because if I didn't go to church, my family would have made my life uncomfortable, and it was easier to just go, But now I feel like I've wrestled with my demons a little bit and asked my questions, and now I feel like I've come to the conclusion, kind of on my own, that yes, I am Catholic because I believe in Catholicism, and yes, I am Christian because I believe in Jesus. And I think that kind of change has been really good for me. And in a way, I'm kind of hesitant to indoctrinate my daughter too much. I kind of want her to ask herself the questions and come up with the answer that I think is right, kind of on her own,
Or at least with a very personal relationship with Christ.
So that's hard. How do you strike that balance? I don't know.
So there's a model of learning from martial arts called Shu Ha Ri. And in the model, there's like 3 steps, right? The Shu level is, and think about like you're learning how to punch, right? Or like it's karate or something. So when you're in Shu, you have one instructor, and that one instructor tells you the right way to do a left outer punch, right? And you practice and you practice and you practice, and then you meet another student and they say, well, actually, I do it like this, and you're like, no, that's wrong. Like this is the right way, and you know how to do the left outer punch, and you just work on it. And then at Ha, it changes a little bit. At Ha, you realize that there are multiple instructors. There's multiple punches. You start learning all the different punches, and you start learning like when this is better, when this is better. You start understanding that different instructors might do the same punch differently, and sometimes this style is better, sometimes this style is better, and you can start making decisions about when to switch, right? And then and so like Shu, you kind of like really know one punch, you know it really well, or you're starting to know like one style, so maybe a lot of punches, but just one style, and you're just super fixated on it, and which is kind of like originally my mom told me, hey, this is the truth, and I said okay,
yeah,
and then at Re, you start realizing, or at Ha, you start realizing there's multiple truths, there's multiple points of view, there's multiple things that actually make sense that smart, good people believe. Yeah. And then at Re, like at least in martial arts, all of a sudden you forget about what the names are. You don't really know the names of the punches. You don't really know the styles anymore. It kind of fades in the background. You know how to punch. If somebody comes at you this way, you do the right punch. If they come at you this way, you do the right punch in that context, but like the names, it just kind of all fades away. And if somebody said, well, what did you just do? You're like, I just did a punch. What? So I wonder if like, instead of saying, yeah, you want that, of course you want that personal relationship, like it sounds like your journey, like all of ours probably, like needed so badly to happen, but maybe you have to start the journey in a place that's just much more black and white and simple, right?
Yeah.
But then be open to gray, like when your kid starts asking for the gray.
Right.
Yeah. Richard Rohr is a prolific Catholic theologian, and he's a priest, and he talks a lot in different places. and I heard him talking about he was actually talking about two stages of life. But I mean, I think it goes along with what you're saying, definitely, Jeremy. He was talking about basically the first half of life and the second half of life, and it has nothing to do with age or it has nothing to do with age. It just has to do with two stages that you can be at almost any time in your life. And the first stage, things are black and white. And he was actually saying that he was actually saying that people should be taught very black and white things, because that's kind of how you understand when you're young, or at least that's how you understand in that first stage of life. You only understand black and white.
It's even as an adult. Like, if you were to start learning martial arts, you'd be really frustrated if they tried to teach you, do whatever is appropriate before they told you, like, this is the right way to do it,
Right, and so that's what he's saying. He's saying when you're teaching anybody anything or conveying any kind of information, you do it in a very black and white way. Even if you don't think black and white, if you try to be abstract with them, it's just going to confuse them. And then at some point, and you really don't really have much to do with this, at some point those students or those children will start seeing the gray and only if they've really got a good black and white education will they then be able to have a really good gray experience. And he was actually saying it's partly, in his opinion at least, I'm sure the opinion of a lot of other people, he's saying it's partly because of a lot of people not being taught black and white, this is wrong, this is right, this is good, this is bad, all this kind of stuff. As kids, they are completely out of it as adults. They're completely egotistical, they're completely into themselves, they don't know, they can't, using the martial arts thing, they can't fight at all because they never learned the basics, And so I struggle with that a lot. I kind of well, what's the best way to do that as a teacher and as a future parent, hopefully, how do I best do that? So, I mean, it's an interesting thing, though.
Yeah.
And going back to the question, and I think we'll probably just end on this one question here. I had another one, but it doesn't really seem as important at the moment, so I'm not going to say it, and you guys can just live in the mystery. But yeah, who do we say Jesus is? I don't actually think that the answer is so important, or is as important as being honest about what the answer is. If we say Jesus is not a very nice person, I think it's more important to be honest about it and kind of meditate on that, and reflect on that for anybody, than to kind of try to give the right answer. Jesus is God. Jesus is, or what I think the right answer is, whatever, And so I really wonder if that might have been what Jesus was headed towards. I really want to know who you say I am. I'm not really looking for a certain answer, but I'm wondering where you guys are at, and I'm wondering if you can be honest about where you guys are at. I don't know. I think I like that idea. It's not necessarily the most theological, but I kind of enjoy it.
I mean, maybe to flip the gospel reading on its head a little bit, right? I was thinking earlier, you were saying why did he give it to Peter? He's not necessarily he couldn't give his authority to anybody that didn't recognize that he had it to begin with. And if Peter was the one that said, hey, you have the authority, he was actually the only one that could actually receive it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Sure. Definitely.
That's a really good point.
Definitely. And I don't know. And I just have a thought about what you were saying, Sophie. I wasn't definitely not trying to jump on you about the whole wondering whether to teach Felicity and Eleanor and any other possible kids you might have this what you believe is right. I think a big thing. Personally, I think a lot of the mistakes that parents make and teachers make is that I'm not talking to you about this. I'm just kind of saying my experience with parents and teachers is that they're actually in that first stage, or they're in that shoe part themselves. They're teaching, but they're in this black and white mode themselves. So when the student or when their kids try to move on and try to understand the other parts, the other types of punches, the masters, the parents and teachers are like, no, this is the right way, which is completely destructive, right? Because they're kind of subverting that whole learning process that the student naturally wants to go towards.
Right.
And so then okay, well, I understand the gray part, but I'm going to show you the black and white. and I'm just going to be waiting in like this loving expectancy that eventually you're going to see your own gray part. And once that happens, I'm just going to let go. I'm going to like just trust that my black and white teaching formed a good foundation.
That's good advice. And I think that's kind of what we've been trying to do. I mean, she's 5, so it's not like we're talking about really deep theological things, but
some of them are core things, like
right.
What is love? Why do we love people? Why do we respect people? How do we show that? They're not deep in the sense of we have a lot of different moving parts, but they're kind of core and fundamentals of who the person is.
Right, and answering her questions in like a very matter-of-fact, simple way that ends up being rather black and white. So I guess you're right. It's just I'm nervous about the gray, but
Yeah.
we have a couple of years, I guess, before we get there. So who knows?
I mean, that's something that we're all gonna have to figure out, right?
Seriously.
My 1-year-olds.
Seriously. Yeah.
So that's probably as good a way to end it as possible. I don't have any kind of witty or nice kind of way to sum this up. If any of you feel free, but I don't have a joke. Do I have a joke? Well, okay, this is a really cheesy joke that I'm just going to say. I'm totally going to ruin the whole flow of this conversation by saying this joke. I'm going to say it anyway because I already introduced it. By the way, my wife is telling me to tell this joke that I know. It's a guitar joke, so if you don't play guitar, I'm sorry, because you're probably not going to get it. But what's God's favorite chord? Guitar chord. What's God's favorite? Well, no, yeah, guitar chord. You guys know?
I don't know. Which one?
It's Jesus.
Yeah.
I can hear the laughter by the people who might listen to this later on who know guitar chords, but it's the G and then S-U-S. Yeah.
That works for piano, like.
Yeah, basically chord. Yeah, musical chord. Right.
That's really funny.
Thank you for entertaining my humor.
I was gonna say E because it's the happy key. I don't know.
But cool. I guess on that we can just encourage each other to be honest with ourselves and to wrestle with God and not take things blindly, and also to I don't know, to be firm in our foundations, I suppose, wherever those may lead us.
Cool.
That being said, I'm going to sign off right now, and we can continue this in just a little bit. Cheers. Thanks a lot, and goodbye.